Okay, so I will go ahead and get started. So this is for Hayavadana. Our production is coming up in a couple of weeks. And obviously some of you are part of the cast and some of you aren't. Thank you all for coming. This is going to be some really great information that will hopefully allow you to connect with the script a little bit better. And if you guys have questions at any point during the presentation, feel free to just ask. Like, I don't need you to wait until the end. It would be nice if we have a little conversation. And also, I think the presentation will be about an hour and 15 minutes long. I'm gonna try not to make it longer than that, but we'll see what happens. But I also do want to be respectful of all of your time. So let's go ahead and get started. So we'll go ahead and get started by talking about the Indian subcontinent itself. So the Indian subcontinent has a very, very old history. Hominid activity is said to have happened even back about 250,000 years ago. So it's one of the oldest inhabited regions in the planet. There's a legendary emperor named Bharata, which is why India to Indians is known as Bharat even today. Anyways, the legend is that he conquered this area of land, and the land was known as Bharatavarsha. So, 7000 BCE, we fast forward a little bit, the Indus Valley civilization is taking place. And you might have heard of Mohenjo-daro, Harappa. Those are in what we would see as modern day Pakistan. So you can see the Indian subcontinent sort of stretches with Afghanistan up to the northwest, going all the way down to even about Myanmar or Burma on the right border. So it stretches a pretty significant piece of land. And the Indus Valley peoples were very, very technologically advanced. So our archaeological findings have actually shown us that the Indus Valley civilization was probably more technologically advanced than the Roman Empire at its peak. And we know the Roman Empire was still around only a few thousand years ago. They had flush toilets and they had wind captors for air conditioning, which was probably an ancient Persian contribution. And the sewage and drainage systems really demonstrate their technological advancement. The people of the Harappan civilization, they were polytheistic. They worship many gods. And we'll talk a lot about, Hinduism and polytheism and all of that kind of stuff today. But polytheistic worship was already around at this time. And something that is very important to note is that Shakti, the mother goddess, who we will be spending much of our presentation talking about today, she was also one of the deities in this pantheon that was worshipped at the time. And not only is this significant because this goddess has been around so long, but because of the sheer fact that she is a goddess in this pantheon. Not a lot of traditions have had really open worship of a feminine or female sort of deity in history, but this shows that the Indian subcontinent has been embracing this philosophy and this way of thinking for thousands of years. And so we have this Indus Valley civilization, and in about 2000 to 1500 BCE, where there's a lot of speculation and unknown information about this event actually happening. But during this time, it's thought that another race known as the Aryans, who we might find up sort of in the Persian region, um, and with the Holocaust and everything, this term was appropriated, and what you might think of as Aryans today, like blonde-haired, blue-eyed people, they were not necessarily the actual Aryans that migrated into India through the Khyber Pass. But they brought Sanskrit with them, and Hinduism essentially became a blend of all of the indigenous religions, the religious practices of the Indian subcontinent, with the contributions and additions of the Aryans who were coming in from that Persian region up there. And with the Aryans' arrival, the Harappan civilization began to decline. And so let's take a look at modern India. So going back a few hundred years, let's talk about British interactions with India. So trade with India had been highly valued by Europe since ancient times, but the long route between them was featured many different obstacles that the British Empire wanted to tackle through the means of colonialism. So initially, they entrusted the task to the East India Company, who went to Bengal. They overthrew the Nawab of Bengal eventually, and they were able to seize control of that region. And then eventually the British Parliament began regulating the East India Company through successive India Acts, um, which basically brought Bengal to the control of the British Empire instead of the East India Company. So slowly and slowly, more and more areas were annexed. There were wars and treaties, and Britain ended up gaining control of most of the Indian subcontinent. And so we fast forward a little bit to the Indian independence movement. So this is taking place, it's since the beginning of the 20th century. And In the 1930s, the British government made some concessions to Indian nationalists, but during World War II, discontent with British rule had grown to such a degree with Indian people that Britain actually feared losing India to the Axis powers. And so Gandhi and other nationalist leaders, they went on their nonviolent campaigns in order to hasten the British departure. And eventually in 1947, India gained independence and also the state of Pakistan was established. Um, and there have been many subsequent political tensions because of this. But taking a look at the actual territory of India, which is established after 1947, we see that there's a variety of different states in different geographical locations. And each of these states actually has a very, very distinct culture and a distinct language. And we'll go into language in just a second. So India's governmental structure, so it's a sovereign, secular, democratic republic with a parliamentary system of government. Um, and so the president is the constitutional head of the executive in the union, and then the governors represent the president in each particular state. And if it's a union territory, then they're administered through the president, through an administrator appointed by the president. Okay, so there are also many different languages in India. And the classical language that we sort of think of that also are the languages of our holy texts is Sanskrit. And some of the earliest form of speech in India were reflected in these texts, such as the Rig Veda, the Brahmanas, and the Upanishads. So these are the oldest preserved treatises from which the Indian literary traditions of verse have sprung. So while these are our holy texts, there are also some of our earliest treatises, pieces of literature written in classical Sanskrit. And in conversational use, in everyday use in India, there are actually many, probably hundreds of different languages. So in the 19th century, there was a survey taken that had identified 179 languages and 544 dialects within India. And then another census report showed 188 languages and 49 dialects. There are a lot of different languages. If we were to really look at India, there are probably hundreds of different languages going on there. But the Constitution basically recognizes 22 different languages. And it's interesting because the society of India is also sort of split along ethno-linguistic lines. Who you consider your ethnicity, your group of people to be, are mainly influenced by the language that you speak. So I am Tamil. I'm from the state of Tamil Nadu. Many of the languages are sort of one state has one language, but they bleed together, obviously. And then you can see like Hindi covers large swaths of land. So various languages have various proportions of use within the country. So Hindi, along with English, are considered the official languages of India, meaning that the official communications of the government are done using Hindi or English. And Hindi and Urdu are two very similar languages. So can you guys see my cursor? Yes? Okay, cool. So up here is where Pakistan would be. And it's interesting because after the split of India and Pakistan, so basically the people in this geographical region all speak a same parent language called Hindustani. And the people of India call theirs Hindi, and the people of Pakistan call theirs Urdu. And there are subtle differences to their language, which I'll talk about in a second. But the majority of these languages are rather similar. And Urdu, the way that it changed from when it split from Hindustani into Hindi and Urdu, it took on a lot. So first of all, it took on the Perso-Arabic script because it was more Muslim influenced geographically. And then it also took Arabic and Islamic sayings, and it became a sort of synthesis of those things, while Hindi didn't have much of that influence. And that's why they're sort of considered two separate languages today. And Kannada, which is the language of Girish Karnad, who wrote Hayavadana, and also the language of the state where Hayavadana was originated, which is Karnataka. That's a Dravidian language. And so it bears some similarity to my language, Tamil, because that's also a Dravidian language. And then another language, Telugu, which is right up here, as you can see. So there are a number of different linguistic groups in India. There are the Indo-Aryan languages, there are the Dravidian languages, and there are more languages, especially when you get out to the east over here. Okay, so let's talk about the religious makeup of India. So Hinduism makes up the bulk of the Indian population. It's about 97.8% of India's population is Hindu. And what you would consider Hindu really depends on who you're asking, or I guess what sort of response would you get to the question, what is Hinduism? Because to some people, Hinduism involves a particular deity or a particular god. To some people, it's a pantheon of gods, even millions of gods. To some people, there is no god at all. And because we'll be spending today talking a lot about Hinduism, I won't go too much into that right now. But just know that they're the bulk of the Indian society, basically, by population. Okay, so Islam. Islam is a monotheistic religion that was revealed by the Prophet Muhammad in 7th century Arabian Peninsula. So today where we would consider Saudi Arabia. So it's a continuation of Abrahamic traditions before it. So it considers some of the Jewish revealings also canon in its religious tradition. And it's spread to India over several centuries of Persian interaction and invasion. And they make up about 14.2% of the Indian population. And India is about, home to about 10% of the world's Muslims. There's a pretty significant Muslim population, especially towards the north. Okay, Sikhi or Sikhism. They make up about 1.7% of the Indian population. Most of them live over here. This is around the area of Punjab. So Punjab was split in two with the partition of India and Pakistan. So there are also more Sikhs going on here in the Pakistan region that we're not seeing just because this is the map of India. But basically, most of the Sikhs of the world live in this region of Punjab, and it was established by Guru Nanak. And it was subsequently led by a succession of 9 other gurus. And upon the passing of the 10th human guru, the spirit of the eternal guru transferred itself to their sacred scripture, which is called the Guru Granth Sahib. And it's sort of, in many ways, a blend of things you would consider traditionally Hindu and Muslim, in that it's monotheistic worship, but it also borrows a lot of vocabulary from the Vedas and other Hindu texts. Okay. Now Buddhism. So Buddhism, it originated in the region that we would consider India by Siddhartha Gautama. It was sort of it sprung out of Hinduism as a rejection of its ritual heavy worship. It wanted to return to the philosophical ideas where Hinduism was planted, rather than focusing on all of the shrubby ritual that is obstructing those gems at the heart of the tradition. So they make up about 0.7% of the Indian population, and only about 1.8% of Buddhists worldwide live in India. There are a considerable amount of Buddhists down in Sri Lanka in the south, and then also it migrated out of India over to the east as well. Okay, and this is Jainism. Jainism is a relatively small component of the Indian population, only about 0.4%. But scholars of religion generally hold that Jainism originated in the 7th century BCE to the 5th century BCE in the Ganges basin of eastern India. And I got the really wonderful opportunity in London to actually go to a gallery of Jain art. It was really, really beautiful. It was a lot of pieces like this one here and sculptures as well. They have a very beautiful tradition that's sort of focused on the path of nonviolence, which is a major tenet of all the different dharmic religions. But for them, it even includes more extreme dietary restrictions, ritual restrictions, etc. Okay, so I don't want to, there's a lot of different ground to cover when it comes to Hindu traditions and philosophies. And I don't want to make any of this confusing, so I'm going to keep this as simple as possible and just show you all a couple of different um, organizations of our philosophies and just walk you through it on a cursory level. So what we're looking at are the philosophical heart of Hinduism. So Hinduism definitely has a ritual component. It has an artistic component, an aesthetic component, a cultural component. This is sort of what we're looking at as the pure philosophy. Now, some Hindus would consider the Vedas as the source of knowledge. Some people would not consider the Vedas as the source of knowledge. And some of those people might not even consider themselves Hindus, but still have some sort of relation to the Vedas or to the Hindu tradition. Let's look at people who follow the Vedas. So this is the Astika. Even within that, we have different branches where it splits off depending on your interpretation of the Vedas. And my mother actually, if we go down to suppressing speculative aspect, then to Vedanta, then over to the right, Advaita Vedanta. My mom is actually a scholar in Advaita Vedanta, and it's from her that I've learned a lot about Hindu philosophy. But as you can just see in this chart here, there's really it's a collection of hundreds of different, completely different schools of thought theologies, philosophies. And so it's really important to consider this massive diversity when it comes to Hinduism. It's real Hinduism as a term exists, but it rarely applies, in my opinion. Okay, now looking at the some members of the Hindu pantheon of deities. Now, I won't speak for all Hindus because I am sure that there are Hindus who have firm beliefs in the polytheism of our religion, and our religion definitely does offer that option for anybody who wants it. But an important way to consider idol worship, or what we would consider idol worship from the Abrahamic standpoint in Hinduism, or polytheistic worship, each of these gods or goddesses that we discuss, they are facets of one Brahman, the absolute consciousness, the absolute reality. And so the essence of the Hindu tradition, some might say, Sanatana Dharma, holds that we are all part and parcel of the divine. Every single thing in the universe's existence is divine, and the universe itself is divine. And it's not that God is really some sort of removed figure sitting on a heaven in the clouds somewhere, but God is the very fabric of reality that allows us to exist in this universe. And each of these different deities that we see in the Hindu pantheon is sort of representative of the many different psychedelic twists and turns and natures of reality. And Hinduism really considers three different natures of reality to be at its forefront. And we might look at this as sort of the dharmic version of the Trinity in Christian theology. And so let's look at what we call the Trimurti, which is, I guess, our Trinity. On the left, you have Shiva, who is the destroyer deity. In the middle, you have Brahma, who is the creator deity. And on the right, you have Vishnu, who is the preserver deity. Now, each of these deities takes hundreds of different forms in Hindu mythology, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But this really shows you here, this is called the Vishwarupam. It's from the chapter 11 of the Bhagavad Gita. And it's the Bhagavad Gita. I'm not sure how much y'all know about it, but basically it is a conversation between an incarnation of God and somebody who has to go to war with his entire family. And it's a very strange and beautiful premise for a holy text, because it's really like the most fundamental teachings of the universe condensed into this message of why it is your duty to kill these people who are your not your friends anymore, but your family. Why do you have to fulfill your dharma, your purpose? And he's Krishna, who is the incarnation of God, has been talking for a while to Arjuna. And Arjuna's still feeling scared. He's still feeling hesitant. And at this point, Krishna shows him his universal form. If any of you know about Oppenheimer, obviously the movie came out recently. After he created the atomic bombs, he is people know him for quoting this chapter of the Bhagavad Gita in when he said, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." This is the moment that he's talking about when Krishna goes into his universal form, and this is an ancient interpretation of monotheism that actually far predates the Abrahamic traditions of monotheism. So notions of monotheism have actually existed in Hinduism for centuries, millennia. But it's often conflated with a narrow perspective of polytheism that also doesn't invite other philosophies. And that's another shortcoming of our usage of the term Hinduism to describe all these various traditions. And okay, so I talked about the philosophical split in Hinduism. Now let's look at the ritual worship split. So the people who worship particular deities, so Vaishnavism referring to the worship of Vishnu, who's the preserver deity, Shaivism referring to the worship of Shiva, who's the destroyer deity. There's not a large portion of Hindus that actually worship Brahma, the creator deity. There's a bunch of different factors that play into that, but essentially all you need to know is that Vaishnavites and Shaivites are the major two sects of Hindu ritual worship. My family comes from the Shaivite side, so Shiva is sort of our main deity, which is why you might see a sort of skewed towards Shiva perspective in today when I'm talking about my experience, my research in Hinduism. But I'm sure you will find many, many stories about Vishnu, and the deities' stories are not also segregated or isolated in any way. Vishnu and Shiva definitely cross over into each other's stories. Actually, there is even a story in which Vishnu becomes a female form, and actually the two fall in love and make love. So, and they actually have a child together. So their stories definitely do cross over. Um, But in each of these different sects, there is a different emphasis towards a different deity or towards a different form of worship. Shaktism is something that we will return to today after our conversation regarding Shakti, who is seen as the mother goddess in the Hindu tradition. And this is Shakti in her form of Parvati from a sculpture from the state of Tamil Nadu, which is where I'm from. Um, One thing about Hinduism is that there are so many different names for the deities that I think it is confusing on purpose. And the reason why I say that is because Hinduism, yes, you can absolutely have one deity in mind that you love to worship, that you know a lot about. But these deities keep changing forms in every single story, and I think it's to serve as a reminder of the universe's unity. And that even though we might pay more attention to a particular deity, I have my favorites too. I worship Kali more than any other deity. It's important to remember that these deities are really just different faces of one another and of a single divine nature. Okay, so to talk about Shakti, let's look at the Devi Mahatmya. So Devi here just refers to what we would consider a goddess. We have Devas and Devis in Hinduism. And my people in Hayavadana, before I even get started with this, what is the first thing that we see in the script in Hayavadana? What is the first montage that we have?
The puja.
Yes, exactly, to the Lord Ganesha, and that's what this starts with as well. So this is a really common thing in Hindu storytelling. It begins with the Lord Ganesha because he is the remover of obstacles, right? And this little tableau here, it doesn't really have much to do with the rest of the story, but this is just an auspicious start to our narrative adventure. So before I get into the rest of the story, so the Devi Mahatmya was written in about the 5th or 6th century. That it It forms a portion of larger work known as the Markandeya Purana. And Markandeya is a rishi. Rishis are sort of spiritually advanced beings with possibly even supernatural abilities. They're very, very spiritually advanced to the point where they have sort of divine communications that the rest of us do not have. And they also set certain things into motion in our Leela, or the play of existence. And it is the first such text that revolves entirely around the figure of the goddess or Devi as the primary deity. So another really cool moment where our tradition really, really holds the female deity to a very high standard. Okay. So we begin with Markandeya, who is this rishi, and he's telling the story of the goddess to his disciple. So Markandeya is our narrator. The disciple is unnamed, but probably named Kraustiki. This is by the banks of a river or pond or in the clearing of the woods. And Markandeya begins by talking about Savarni. So he says, Savarni, the son of Surya, is called the eighth Manu. Listen while I describe in detail about his birth. How Savarni, illustrious son of Surya, became the lord of the eighth Manvantara by the grace of Mahamaya. Okay. In the cosmological speculations of later Hinduism, a day in the life of Brahma is divided into so Brahma is the creator deity, and in his life, each day is divided into 14 periods called Manvantara, and each of these lasts for 306,720,000 human years. So he has 14 of these in a day of his life. And in each secondary cycle, the world is recreated and the new Manu appears to become the father of the next human race. Okay? The present age is considered the 7th Manu cycle. So, Savarni is called the 8th Manu. And we're about to listen while he talks about his full story. And we might even forget that he's talking about this. And this is the design of Mahamaya. And we'll see in a second. Okay, so we sort of have a little story within a story here, like we do in Hayavadana. Because Indian storytelling traditions really do love their twists and turns and stories within stories. So the king, Suratha, arrives at the hermitage of the sage Medhas and seeks answers to his problems from the sage. So Suratha, who's this king, has been beaten by enemies and he seeks refuge at Medhas's ashram. Ashrams are just little hermitages owned by these rishis or sages that have animals, plants. People can come and stay, learn spiritual teachings. They're really a place to come for refuge. And then the merchant Samadhi arrives at this ashram as well, and he's seeking answers to similar troubles. And so Medus offers them some spiritual guidance. So this story that Medus is giving, it begins with the Lord Vishnu, the preserver deity, asleep on his serpent. And we are somewhere between the realms here in a world of, it's just an ocean world. He's just on his snake. And essentially, Brahma is arising on a lotus from his navel, and the demons Madhu and Kaitaba are approaching. And Vishnu awakens from his sleep, and he fights the demons and decapitates them. And the demons of Hindu mythology are rather tricky. They have a lot of witty little loopholes that they like to use with the gods so that their life might be spared in the last moment. And the demons see that the whole world is made of water, and so they say, okay, Lord, slay us where the earth is not flooded. And so Vishnu takes them on his lap and decapitates them with his discus. Um, and this fight is actually thousands of years long. And essentially, even from the beginning, we get a very spiritual insight into the nature of Maya here. Because Vishnu is in a state of deep meditation and transcendence where he's connected with the ultimate reality. And then the play of Maya brings him back into reality when he has to fight these demons. And Maya is, again, that spiritual, transcendent nature of whom we personify as the mother goddess. And Maya is the delusion that allows us to experience our reality, but it's also our source of energy to worship in order to release from this cycle of delusion. So it's a very, very psychedelic sort of way of thinking that you have to get used to when it comes to the Indian deities. Okay, and so after this happens, the Hindu gods are defeated by the army of Mahishasura. So Mahishasura is a buffalo demon, and he is now ruling over Indra's heaven. And Indra is actually the lord of thunder, and it's actually very cool to look at how he's similar to Zeus and Thor, who are two other deities with similar sort of abilities that sprung out of the Indo-European tradition. So there's actually a fair number of similarities that scholars began looking at between Vedic, Greek, and Norse mythology once they discovered that there was an Indo-European proto-language that split into all these different languages and Sanskrit. So these studies began in the late 1700s, and with the existence of the Indo-European language family, it seemed that there was a more compelling case that these different cultures might also share a mythological base owing for their similarity. Okay, so in Hinduism, there are lower gods and then there are upper gods. And our upper gods we can consider as our Trimurti, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. These three are representative of the primordial forces of nature. Destruction, preservation, and creation. And so to them, the other gods go in order to seek cosmic boons and blessings. And so the other gods, now kicked out of their heavens after Mahishasura has taken over the heavens, they come and Shiva and Vishnu become very angry. And so from their energy, from their anger, emanates the mother goddess. So a sort of metaphysical understanding of Shiva and Shakti. Shiva is the manifest reality. A way to think about it might be the beats of a song. So Shiva is the beats, the rhythm, and Shakti are the colorful, boundless notes that allow us to perceive the beat that is Shiva. And so that sort of analogy extends to our cosmic understanding as Hindus, that the universe wants so badly to experience itself, this universe that we might call Brahman, the absolute reality, that it uses Maya, its Shakti, whom we personify as a goddess, in order to then experience itself. But this holy process of allowing the universe to experience itself is a process of delusion. And that's why we lose our reality as human beings or as people existing in this visual universe, because we lose the nature of Brahman through our very existence with the permission of Maya. And it's to her that we worship in order to return to that initial understanding that we are Brahman. So again, there's a lot of different layers to Hindu mythology. I don't want to confuse you guys. But Shakti is the embodied power of, I hear Shiva and Vishnu together from the essence of all the gods. And so this mother goddess, whom we might call Durga or Ambika or Chandika, she has many, many names. She rides out and she destroys Mahishasura's army. And Mahishasura takes a bunch of different forms. He's a lion for a little bit. He's a human warrior for a little bit. He's an elephant. He's a buffalo. And one thing that I find really cool in this scene of war is that the goddess actually takes a divine drink in the middle. She says, "Roar, roar, O fool, for a moment while I drink this wine." And I think that it's also a cool connection to the idea of soma, which is an ancient psychedelic that's taken in the Hindu tradition. Because I wonder if this can be taken as psychedelic allegory, because I wonder if this divine drink that she's drinking has some sort of connection to this mental battle that we're seeing as well as this physical battle that's going on the battlefield. um, she's at war, and eventually she slays and beheads Mahishasura. And the assembled gods come together to praise the goddess, because when all the other male gods were struggling, she was the one who really had the ability to beat them, and she's just one person. So that just shows you the essence of feminine strength when it comes to the Hindu tradition. When all the other gods, in their grand nature of creation and destruction and preservation, struggle to do something, it's Shakti that gets the job done. We see that like many, many times in the Hindu mythology. And that's not and it's a really wonderful, empowering story when we apply it to gender as well, and in our feminist understanding of society, but also on a metaphysical level. There's this book that I really love. It's called Aghora at the Left Hand of God. And it basically talks about how Shiva, without Shakti, would become Shava, which means corpse. So without Shakti, there would be no Shiva. This Shiva, who we consider Mahadev and who we consider the universe. Without Shakti, we would not even be able to perceive Shiva. And Shakti is the energy that will allow us to become reunified with everything. Okay, fast forward a little bit. This goddess has defeated Mahishasura. But the demons are back, and Shumba and Nishumba have taken the god's place in heaven again. And so the gods, they remember who defeated Mahishasura last time. They're back. They're praising Shakti, and the form Ambika emanates from her body. And so two demons, Chanda and Munda, find Ambika. She's just vibing, and they come and disturb her. And they go and tell the demon king Shumba, who has just taken a spot in heaven, of the beautiful woman residing on the mountain. And so Shumba sends his messengers Sugriva to the goddess, and Sugriva tells Ambika that the demon king Shumba is offering her marriage. This is the demon king Shumba, and this is Ambika. And she declines his offer quite severely, because she has promised herself that she would only be married to one who could defeat her in battle, and she is sure that Shumba would not be able to defeat her in battle. And if we remember, Parvati is actually married to Shiva. That is who she has promised herself that is who she knows could actually take her up in battle, and not Shumba. So Shumbha gets really mad about Ambika's answer, and he sends another demon to Dhumra Lochana, which instant regret because oops. Okay, he sends another demon, Dhumra Lochana, whom Ambika reduces to ashes simply by looking at him. And so then the demon king sends Chanda and Munda off to battle, because now he's like at war with this Devi, because she's just incinerated one of his demons when he wants to marry her, and she said no. And so Ambika creates this terrifying form of Kali, who you see, she's the dark-skinned goddess standing next to Ambika. You see like a crescent moon on her forehead. You see this sort of like comb made of rib structure. She's a terrifying form. And Kali stands by her side, and they confront Shumbha's army led by Chanda and Munda. And Kali actually emanates from Ambika's forehead. The forehead has a lot of significance when it comes to Hindu ritual and mythology, because this is where we imagine that what we call our third eye is located. And the third eye really is not a physical eye, rather it is a ability to view things with the clear consciousness of somebody who has practiced a lot of sadhana, or who might be more closer to the nature of understanding Brahman than somebody who has not realized those spiritual potentials. Okay, so Kali just absolutely destroys the elephants and the chariots of the army of the demons. Like she literally just picks them up and puts them in her mouth. She's tearing through these armies. Both of them are. They're absolutely ravaging these armies. And Chanda and Munda attempt to find Kali. They attempt to fight Kali. Oops, sorry, I think I lost myself a little bit there. Okay, I'm sorry. There was a little bit of error in the narration, but we'll keep going. So at this point, they've been fighting, and Chanda and Munda are decapitated. Kali has beheaded them and given their heads to Ambika. And now Kali becomes known as Chamunda, and Ambika becomes known as Chandika. Their names really just they just merge into one another as you move through these stories. And again, it's a fascinating reminder of that there is a unity connecting every single facet of these goddesses. So Ambika has become Chandika, who is more warlike and armored, and Kali is known as Chamunda. So just remember that as we move forward. So at this point, right, they're in the middle of this war, and it's like an Avengers moment basically, because the goddess summons the Shaktis of all of the different gods, and like I said, the Shaktis are basically the energies of these gods to have their divine abilities and to become manifest. So again, the Shaktis are what's getting the job done. And so they've all come together to confront the demons. And the Shaktis are attacking the demons. And then the Shaktis begin to fight with a demon known as Rakta Bij. And Rakta Bij, he's a very, very interesting demon. So remember how I said that the demons of Hindu mythology like to play around and they have very tricky aspects to them. With Rakta Bij, if you hurt him and he spills a drop of blood and that drop of blood falls to the ground, a new Rakta Bij will emerge from it. So that's very irritating, right? How do you kill him without making his blood fall to the ground? Well, you just drink all his blood before it falls to the ground. And that's exactly what Kali does. And they're absolutely destroying Rakta Bij. You can see Kali's just going at it. She's sticking her tongue out all the way, collecting all of his blood so that a new Rakta Bij won't come out. And so the goddesses continue their battle with the armies of Shumba and Nishumba. And Chandika and the other goddesses put an end to Nishumba. So Nishumba is dead. Nishumba and Shumba are the two demons who had taken over heaven. One of them is now dead. Now Shumba, who is Nishumba's brother, he's obviously upset. His brother has just been killed. And so he begins to taunt the Shakti. He says, "Why do you need the Shaktis of all of the gods here in order to defeat us? Like this is an unfair advantage. You would not be able to do this by yourself." And so then the Shakti reminds him that all of these different Shaktis are just various manifestations of her own Shakti, that she is the only Shakti after all. And so she calmly retracts all of the other Shaktis. They're no longer there, it is just her. And she kills him. And she's dead. And and that's the end of the story, basically. And all of the different gods are praising the goddess. And the gods get to go home, the demons go back to hell. And this is a story about how Shakti is victorious here. But there are many layers to this story. It seems when we first look at it, right, like just this grand story of, oh my goodness, here's this war and she's drinking his blood and people are getting beheaded and all of this kind of stuff. There's a very, very deep metaphysical play going on here with the idea of Maya. Maya being, again, the one who creates a delusion within us and the one whom we worship in order to release from the delusion. So, upon a third read of the Devi Mahatmya, a lot of those deeper philosophical concepts become apparent to us. We see what Shakti really means in all of these different forms, and we see the deep philosophical teachings when it comes to defeating each of these different demons that she fights, which have their abilities for particular reasons in our mythology. Okay, and at this point, all of the different gods are just praising the goddess, and she disappears. And we're back to Surata and Samadhi, who are our king and our merchant, who are talking with our sage, Medus. And this whole time, Medus has been telling them this lesson. So Christianity does really well with the parables, and Hinduism does really well with the parables as well, in very, very colorful, imaginative directions. Um, and so Medus, at this point, has taught them their lesson through the story that the goddess is the cause of their illusion of attachment. Remember, both Surata and Samadhi came here with deep problems. The king has lost his kingdom, and Samadhi is having very, very bad problems with his family and his finances. And so Medus reminds them that the goddess is the cause of their illusion for attachment, and along with being the cause of their delusion, she is also the means, if they worship her, for escaping from their suffering. And so, after 3 years of worshiping the goddess, she appears to Surata and Samadhi and grants them a boon. And she tells Surata that he will slay his foes and he will reobtain his kingdom in a few days, and he will become the eighth Manu. Remember from the beginning, um, he said that this story will be telling us about how the eighth Manu came to be through the play of Maya. And so he is going to be the eighth Manu. And then Samadhi will be given supreme knowledge for his self-realization, which actually in many ways is what the word samadhi means. Somebody is in samadhi when they are in union with the divine. And so he will be given that supreme knowledge, what we might consider the knowledge of the Buddhas. Okay, so a little bit more on Shakti, who is the mother goddess of the Hindu tradition. So these are the Dasa Mahavidya, which is an imagining of 10 different iterations, forms of this mother goddess Shakti. And in these avatars, incarnations, well, these aren't exactly avatars because avatars more refers to something like when a deity incarnates on Earth. But in either way, we see a direct parallel here to Vishnu's avatars. He has 10 different forms that he takes as well. Rama is one of them, Krishna is one of them. And so the forms that we have here, you can see they're very, very varied. They all represent very, very different aspects of the mother goddess. And so in the top, from the left to the right, we have Kali, Tara, Tripura Sundari, Bhuvaneshwari, and Bhairavi. And then at the bottom, we have Chinnamasta, who's honestly one of my favorite ones on this list because I just think her artistic depictions are absolutely insane. Like, basically, she has cut off her own head in order to feed those two standing next to her with streams of her blood. And then this is Dhumavati over here, which is the end of time realized as an old woman. And this is Matangi. My favorite artist is actually MIA, and her name is Matangi. And actually, Matangi is the goddess of fine art and spoken literature and things like that. And so it's really cool that for some of us in the Hindu tradition, our names really become reflections of who we become later in our lives, or at least prayers for what our parents hope we become later in our lives. Okay, so I want to read you guys some passage from my favorite book on this, Agora at the Left Hand of God, because I could talk about Kali as an imaginated deity, as a blue-skinned woman who wears necklaces of skulls. She has a head dripping with blood and a cup to collect it. I could talk about that aspect, and those pictures are here for you guys to see that. But I think it would be of more benefit also, Kristen, for your understanding in playing Kali, to understand how she affects Hinduism and how we see the fabric of reality itself as being dependent on, some people would say, Kali. Because Kali means she who is black, or it could mean she who is time. So Kali is the essence of time itself. And when you really think about that, it starts to make sense why she is so terrifying, because there's really nothing more terrifying than time. Even death fears time. Because time, what can we do ever to stop or to reverse time? It's a thing that people really wish that they could do in life so that they could go back and talk to that loved one, or that they could go back and change that event that happened in the past. But time is the ultimate energy that keeps us going forward at light speed. And that is Kali. She is that ferocious time. So let me read for you this passage. Ma is the source of all knowledge. Ma meaning mother, because Kali is referred to as the mother here. She's the divine mother. Ma is the source of all knowledge, the source of both delusion and relief from delusion. She is the foundation and supporter of this universe and of all possible universes. She is called Adya because Adya means that which is first and which is therefore eternal, which has no beginning and no end, which is ever existent. Ma, Shakti, Maya, these three words describe her, but each emphasizes a different attribute. Maya is her delusive aspect, her capacity to bind one to limited forms. So again, Maya is that force that allows us to perceive, and it's the delusion that keeps us from realizing our true nature because we perceive so much. Shakti is her aspect of power and energy. Shakti is all of the forces that our gods embody. It's the energy that allows them to embody them. And Ma indicates her maternal aspect, the motherhood of God. Maya can exist only where there is duality. This is an important concept in Hinduism because even when I talk about Shiva and Shakti, we see a duality there, sort of like yin and yang. And I like that Hinduism really it plays with the idea of gender. It says, okay, here is a duality that people know very, very well because you invariably belong to one of these. There are people who don't belong to one of these. But even with the idea of biological sex, you invariably do end up belonging to one of these dualities. And so Hinduism plays on this pattern of duality that it's seen in society and then turns them into these vast philosophical concepts of boundlessness and then grounding and then rhythm and then color and then shape and all of these different things that we would experience as sort of like going from one into the next. It really, my favorite thing about the Hindu tradition is the psychedelic thinking that it allows and how it bridges all of these different various concepts and allows you to take things like gender, which I'm not even a particular fan of at the end of the day, I won't lie, and worship them as concepts that are deserving of love and respect and worship that can be positive things in our lives and optional things in our lives. Uh, the universe is full of pairs and basic principles, male and female. Again, basic principles, they're talking about things like biology here. Positive and negative, active and passive. Our philosophy maintains that the soul is only one, indivisible in the state of Satchit Ananda. And a lot of the different Dharmic traditions have actually looked at this sort of monism, pantheism, and it looks a lot like monotheism sometimes. That even with Sikhism, it's a sort of similar Sikhi. It's a similar idea, and it looks a lot like monotheism or something close to monotheism, where the creation is also part of the created. The creation is part of the creator, and the creation is the creator, and the two get to interact in countless possibilities. So Satchitananda means existence, consciousness, bliss. This is another epithet for Brahman itself, and also for the singular Atman and for the nature of existence. But the soul cannot enjoy itself unless there is some observer, someone who can perceive the reality. To satisfy this urge for an observer, Shakti projects herself. She is as unbounded and absolute as is the universal soul or Atman. She is one and the same as Atman. But from an understanding of ourselves in our relation to Brahman and why we feel separated from Brahman, it is important to consider Maya as a separate force. And the only difference between Brahman and Maya is that she feels herself to be separated from him. This is her play, the unchanging Atman, and this gives her the impetus to try to locate him and reunite with him. So do you guys remember when the Shakti burned somebody to a crisp by simply looking at her? This is the amount of energy Shakti really has. If Shakti really wanted, the universe would be over like that, right? Shakti obviously is not a entity in that way with a personality. Shakti is the mass total of all of our Shaktis. But Shakti has immense, immense power. But the play of Maya is the stretching out of time. It's the limiting of energy, playing with the different limits that Shiva sets in order to create a palatable illusion of our own existence that's not just insane in terms of energy. So this is her play. She plays that she separates from him and then reunites, and then separates from him and reunites. And this play is what allows us to perceive our very existence. And obviously, these are sort of metaphorical understandings of a deeper physics that are happening, of deeper physics that are happening. Maya is very terrifying, it is true. Maya will always frighten you or try to, but she will never hit you if you try to come near. People are afraid they'll be finished if they leave off whatever they are doing in their lives. If I lose all my money, what will become of me? But everyone is going to be finished sooner or later. This is sort of a hallmark of the dharmic way of thinking. It can sound a little bit fatalistic or nihilistic at times. It's very, very aware of its own mortality, I will say. But everyone is going to be finished sooner or later. If you tell Maya, I came into the world naked and I will go out naked, do whatever you please, I don't care, then you can succeed at sadhana. And so that state of submission, and submission is an interesting word to think about because the translation for submission, one of the translations in Arabic is Islam. Um, so it says, do whatever you please, I don't care, then you succeed at sadhana. So it talks about a complete submission to this idea of the divine unity, Kali. Okay, let's look at some comparisons with the Quran, because I really do find the Islamic traditions very dear to me. And one of my favorite aspects of Islam is al-Asma al-Husna, which are the divine names of Allah, and there are 99 different names, which the Creator God Allah has chosen for Himself and expressed in the Quran. And let's look at a couple of them and how they're similar to the qualities that we see in the deity of Kali. So the first one, al-Mudillu, that's the dishonorer. Al-Mumit, the creator of death, and Ad-Dar, the distresser. These are all qualities that we've just seen expressed in Kali over the course of the story. And growing up as somebody who worshipped Kali, and Kali is one of those goddesses that sort of escapes the bubble of India and makes it into Western media because of her sort of demonic, satanic appeal. And obviously that's by design. I don't think it is untrue or offensive to say that there are aspects of her aesthetic that are demonic. And I think it's on purpose to say there are demons and then there's me. Who should you really be afraid of? That's the whole concept that it's expressing there. But a lot of my peers when I was growing up had a very difficult time understanding worship of the goddess Kali because of how grotesque she is in her characterization. But this shows you that this is a common element across several different religions, right? There is a worship of the grotesque. There is a worship of everything when you go into the more esoteric reading of these traditions, that there is no good or bad, that the Lord is not necessarily always good. The Lord is loving, the Lord is benevolent. But the Lord might use things that we might not consider good, because to the Lord, what is morality but a human invention? And yet at the same time, the morality is a gift from the Lord in order for us to maintain a better relationship with the Lord. So it's just very interesting to think about how God does not have to always be good, and in many, many traditions around the world, God is not always seen as good, but God is seen as the loving mother. That's another thing that I wanted to talk about, a similarity between Islam and Hinduism. So we talk a lot about the mother. We talk about this sort of womb-like protection that we get from God in Hinduism. And we see this obviously in the Divine Mother. We see this in Kali. We see this in Shakti. She is our mother. We call her our mother. We call her Ma. But we also see this in a form of Vishnu, in the Vishnu Sahasranamam. One of the names for Vishnu is Hiranyagarbha, which translates to golden womb. And when we look at the two main names that Allah gives Himself in the Quran, it's Ar-Rahman and Ar-Rahim. And the root, Rahm, refers to a womb. It refers to the encapsulating essence of a protective womb around you. And that's just interesting to me that we see these terrible qualities and we see these loving qualities and we see mother and we see parent in the divine, regardless of where we are on the pale blue dot. This is Sri Ramakrishna. Um, he's quite an important figure in Hindu history. And I'll just tell you a little story about him. So he was a mystic. In 1852, poverty forced Ram Kumar and Ramakrishna to leave. That's his brother Ram Kumar, to leave their village to seek employment in Calcutta. There, they became priests in a temple dedicated to the goddess Kali. In 1856, however, Ram Kumar died. Ramakrishna, now alone, prayed for a vision of Kali Ma. Kali the mother, whom he worshipped as the supreme manifestation of God. He wept for hours at a time and felt a burning sensation throughout his body while imploring the divine mother to reveal herself. When she did not, the young priest sank into despair. According to traditional accounts, Ramakrishna was on the verge of suicide when he was overwhelmed by an ocean of blissful light that he attributed to Kali. Kali is the dark mother, but this is an ocean of blissful light. Visions of Kali or other deities brought ecstasy and peace. He once described Kali as a limitless, infinite, effulgent ocean of spirit. Soon after his first vision, Ramakrishna commenced on a series of sadhanas, which are austere practices in the various mystical traditions, including Bengali Vaishnavism, again, Vaishnavism meaning worship of Vishnu, Shakta Tantrism, which refers to worship of Shakti and the mother goddess and her various emanations. Advaita Vedanta, which is non-dual Vedanta, which again is the form that I expressed that my mom studies regularly, and the form that many consider to be the divine essence of Hinduism as a totality, if you can say such a thing. And even Islamic Sufism and Roman Catholicism. Uh, so he's very much into that idea of religious pluralism and also religious unification. That all, not necessarily of making all of us worship in one particular way, but in seeing that there is one divine worshipped in many particular ways in all of our various religious traditions. So he was a very notable figure in the worship of Kali, and many Kali worshippers to this day look up to him and his teachings from when he was here. Finally, let's just take a look at Shaktism, which is just basically the worship of the mother goddess Shakti as a sect in Hinduism. Um, so when we look at different traditions, we have the Vaishnava tradition, Shaiva tradition, Smarta tradition. Again, we have a lot of different outlets for Hindu worship here. Smarta traditions are sort of the philosophical traditions, like Advaita Vedanta, for example. And you will see that they have a very clear scientific method that I think sets them apart a little bit from some of the other Hindu traditions, in that they're almost research based in ways that the other ritual traditions can sometimes fall a little bit short of. These traditions are very much focused on challenging the mind, building the mind, um, questioning, debating. And you can see that they have 6 different standards for what they consider to be reliable, whereas some of the other sects have about 3 of these different epistemological standards. So, interesting thing to look at there. But most of them consider Brahman, Maya in various different capacities. But most of these see a divine unity in the entire universe that's normally expressed through the form of one of these particular deities, which is what we call Vishishtadvaita. Um, Vishishtadvaita, which is sort of between what we would call Dvaita and Advaita, which is it views the entire essence of Brahman with particular characteristics. It doesn't forget that Brahman sometimes takes specific forms in our manifestation. Okay, and this is the end of my presentation. And if anybody has any questions, this is the time to discuss with me, or even just questions about your particular your particular role in the production. Like Kristen, if you had specific questions about Kali, this is the time.